This is an open letter for my white English-speaking friends regarding immigration. Here's the thing, folks. Ever since animal life formed on planet Earth, all kinds of animals, from birds to mammals to all kinds of different animals, and insects, birds, mammal, insects, they all migrate. And the point of migration is quite simple: going from an inhospitable place to a hospitable place, period. Now, for a wildebeest, or for a butterfly, or for different kinds of birds that migrate, hospitable place is a place where there is more food. An inhospitable place is a dry or cold place where there is less food. There are evidence in biology, there is research that has been done that has shown that some birds in northern countries, nowadays some birds in northern countries refuse to migrate south during winter because they're being hand-fed by people. So those birds don't seem don't see the reason to migrate south to a more hospitable place with more food, where, in other words, migration is such a difficult thing to do. Migration is such a difficult thing to do. So much energy is used, so much hassle, so much difficulty, so much danger in migration that even birds will not do it if they don't have to. So there was this article in I believe New York Times or some other magazine that I read, that some birds in northern Europe, especially England, are being fed by people. They're not migrating. They used to migrate during winter to southern areas of Europe or North Africa, but they're not anymore, because even during the winter they can put up with cold. They can put up with the cold as long as there is food. And people are giving them food, hand feeding them with these bird feeders or whatever. So the birds have stopped migrating, period. They don't want to go through that difficult, dangerous, hard journey. And they put up with the cold. Now, I stated these facts is to state that, because I want to make it clear that this is not a human thing. This is not first of all, it's not a brown thing. It's not only people with brown skin migrate. It's not a human thing. All kinds of animals migrate. And if the conditions are okay, at least okay, even the birds will not migrate. They don't need perfect condition, but even if the condition is okay, they will not migrate, because it's a tough process. Back to human beings. Folks, there is this concept that this concept that many people talk about, especially white English-speaking people talk about, that we are being invaded by brown people. We are being invaded by non-English-speaking people, or people who don't speak our native tongue. This is being repeated over and over and over again in North America and in Europe. We used to be only Western Europe, now Eastern Europe, Hungary and Poland and France and the Scandinavian countries. They're all fed up with the situation in which The locals feel they're being marginalized themselves by the sheer number of non-locals migrating to their area, and they feel threatened. They feel their culture is threatened. They feel their language is threatened, under threat. All of this, it's sort of like, we don't want these people coming here because we are comfortable as it is. We are doing fine. We have our own language and our own culture and our this and our that and the other, and we just don't feel them coming. Don't feel they should be coming here. They should stay where they are. As I said with the bird thing, the bird story, people don't migrate just because. If you compare it to the comfortable countries in the West, in Western Europe and in northern Americas, if you compare it to them, in these countries, when a family wants to change house, they're not going to change country or city, or sometimes they're not even planning on changing the area of the city. They just want to move from a smaller house to a bigger house in the same area of the city. They go through months of planning and thinking and planning and thinking about finances and schools and school areas and environments, and they go through all kind of statistics of the new place that they're going, that they want that place to be how they want it to be, how they expect it to be. They don't want any surprises when they're moving from one house to another house in the same city, in the same area of the city. What that says, what you should understand, is that brown people are the same. They're also people, and they think exactly the same. They like to think and plan and plot, so, they won't have to endure any risks or dangers. And migration, whether legal or even illegal, which is much more riskier and dangerous, is something that people, even brown people, don't go into willingly. It's not a willing process. It's not like people get up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to migrate to France today. It's not like somebody in Central Africa gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to migrate to France. Somebody in Libya gets up in the morning and says, today I'm going to migrate to Italy. I have my food, I have my shelter, I have my education, I have my roads, I have my hospital, but I'm going to go to Italy. I'm going to cross a fucking sea that half the people who try to cross it, the Mediterranean, they end up dead, become shark feed. I'm going to go through this fucking risky journey to get there, but just because. Although I have everything that I need, security and stability here, but I'm just going to migrate because I like Italian pussy. It doesn't work like that, folks. Not even for brown people, not even for black people. It doesn't work like that. Nobody wants to take unnecessary risk, not even for white pussy. What is actually taking place is that the environment of these brown and black people is being destabilized and insecure. So these folks decides to, okay, let's go find a more stable and secure environment. Stability and security. What these folks are headed for, the reason for their migration or immigration or whatever their movement, the reason for their movement is to find stability and security. Stability and security has a bunch of undercategories. That's food stability, shelter stability, security, education, security of education, security of health, security of food, security of shelter, all of that. There is a bunch of anything that a human being needs to, to live comfortably. So they are moving because there is no security and stability where they are. So they're moving. It's simple enough. In other words, they're not moving because they want to be with white people. They're not moving because they love to, not be able to speak the locals' language. They're not moving because they don't like their culture, or they're not moving because they don't like their government, or they're not moving because of that. Now, here's a footnote here. 1%, 2% of the population always does that, moves while there is security and stability. 1% of the population of any country, anywhere in the world, 1 to 2% of the population doesn't like it for whatever reason. The economic situation is not what they like, the political situation of where they live is not what they like. For whatever reason, 1 to 2% of the population moves. You can find 1 to 2% of Americans moving on yearly basis out of America to other countries. Maybe not on the yearly basis, but in general right now, if you calculate, you will see that 1 to 2% of the American population is living outside of America. Born American citizens are living outside of America. 1 to 2%, even maybe more, of British population right now is living outside of Britain, because of Britain doesn't have warm climates. So in America, in the United States, at least people can move between cold and warm climates. Some countries don't have the option of warm climate, so many of the retirees move. Many of them. It's like maybe in Britain, I can say probably at least 5% at any given time, 5% of the British population is living outside of UK. France the same, Scandinavian countries the same. So at least 1 to 2%, at the most 5 to 10% of any given population moves. They move not because they don't like the weather, they don't like the politics, they don't like the economy. But that 1 to 5%, 2% of the population that moves is not what worries other countries around, that these people are invading us. This 1 to 2% who like to move usually are well off, and they don't need, they're not going there for any place for survival. They just have particular likings that they don't see it in their own environment, so they move. So that aside, the real migration, when the bulk of the people move, is large numbers move, is because there is no security and stability in the area that they were. Here's the thing, folks. People can live without freedom. People can live without democracy. But people cannot live without security and stability. Security and stability are essential for life. Freedom and democracy are not essential for life. This is simple enough to understand. You have a birds in the cage and you have birds in the wild. They both stay alive. as long as, the caged one was born in the cage and the free one was born free, they both stay alive for a long time. Although one is caged, one is free, even the caged one, as long as there is security and stability, there is security, the cage is protecting it from predators, and there is somebody who's feeding, providing food security for the caged bird, the caged bird is going to stay alive. And the free bird, as long as it has its wings to run away from danger, and its wings and eyes to look for food, it stays alive for a long time. And the reality is, the caged bird probably is going to outlive the free bird, because the cage is much more secure, and as long as there is food security in the caged bird is going to outlive the free bird. That goes to show that the freedom is not essential to life, but stability and security is essential to life. What is happening that these people are moving out? Obvious. They weren't moving out before, they are moving out now. People of Libya weren't moving out of Libya 10 years, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. They're moving out now. Why? Simple. For a long time, they had security and stability. Now they don't. What happened? There was a guy who was providing them with security and stability. By many evidence, many people, many witnesses, there are many articles that say basically there was free education in Libya, there was free healthcare in Libya. Many of the people's homes and shelters were free or subsidized to a large extent. So people of Libya had security and stability. No, they didn't have freedom or democracy, but they had security and stability, so they weren't moving out. They weren't running away from anything. They were existing, they were living. Southern Europe was not overrun by Libyans or other Africans. So this shows that security and stability are essential to keep people where they are. Democracy and freedom are not. People can live without democracy and freedom, just like the bird that is living in a cage. It's still living. Doesn't see the need to try to get the fuck out of the cage. Especially if that bird was born in the cage. Absolutely doesn't see a need to leave the cage. In fact, leaving the cage for a bird that was born in the cage is hazardous. And you can be sure that the bird that was born in a cage will not last more than a day outside the cage, because it doesn't know how to defend itself, how to find food, how to do anything outside of the cage. And something is going to happen to the bird that has been born in the cage and suddenly leaves, because it doesn't know the rules, regulations of life outside of the cage. Here's what's taking place, folks. The main misunderstanding. Well, it's obvious why the security and stability of Libya went away is because United States, Canada, some European countries, NATO allies decided that no, we have an issue with this ruler here. He thinks he's got a big dick. We don't think he's got a big dick. He feels he wants to be a great leader. and he might think we might have a problem with him in the future in terms of our power and our control over Northern Africa. When I say our control, I mean NATO's control over Northern Africa, over Asia. NATO is everywhere nowadays. So basically, these leaders of NATO, decided that we want to get rid of this guy, Gaddafi, because he's a pain in our ass. He doesn't follow our directions. He thinks he can be independent. He thinks he's running a sovereign nation. He's not taking orders properly. He thinks he's somebody. So in order to cut him down, they removed him. But as it has been said many times before, even by US military, that many times US military has said, we are not nation builders. And they're right. It's a military force. They're not there to build nations. They don't have the skill set to build nations, or they don't have the will, and they don't have the will. It's a military force. So what happens is the military of these Western powers goes in, removes the unwanted pain in the ass. Remember, Gaddafi was a pain in the ass of the Western powers. He wasn't a pain in the ass of his own people. And I will explain why. He was pain in the ass of the Western powers, not a pain in the ass of his own people. So the Western powers, the NATO alliance, removed a pain in their ass. The same thing happened to Saddam. He was a pain in the ass of the Western alliance. He wasn't a pain in the ass for his own people. Yes, he was a dictator, but I will get to that. But at least under him, Gaddafi, Saddam, and more of these people, there was security and stability, and because there was security and stability, nobody was running away out of Iraq, nobody was running away out of Libya, and a lot of people were alive under them because of security and stability that was provided, that are not alive now, because after removing the security and stability, anarchy took over, and many people lost their lives during the anarchy. And still is going on. Here's the thing, folks. The reality of the matter. What's real? When the British were building their empire, they used a phrase to sell their empire building business to their own people and some other Europeans who wanted to pay attention. They said, they used the phrase, we have the moral duty to spread civility between these savages. We have the moral obligation to spread civility between these savages. And by savages, they meant anybody who's non-British in general, and in particular non-Europeans. That means Africans and Asians and South Americans, anybody. North Americans. So the British built an empire based on a phrase that today we all recognize that it was basically hogwash. The phrase spreading civility is now we know is hogwash, because there are many civilizations in the world, and it doesn't necessarily mean what is civil to me is civil to you. Civility doesn't have a unique meaning that this is a civilized thing to do. No, it's let's say a civil thing to do in United Kingdom as a greeting is to shake hand. who's to say that the Chinese who or the Indians who, when they meet each other, they don't shake hands, they just put their hands together and bow their head as a form of greeting. So that's one civilization who has come up with that mode of greeting each other, and this is another civilization who has come up with this mode of greeting each other. So the two both can consider themselves civilized. This is how we do things, and this is how they do things, and this is how the other ones do things. There is no one way that we can say this is the civilized way to do something and that is the uncivilized way of doing it. Now we know this. Now we know the phrase that the British used to, build their empire, to sell their empire to at least to their own people, was hogwash. We are going to spread civility. We have the obligation to spread civility. Was hogwash because nobody, first of all, the locals didn't ask for it. They didn't say, please bring us British civility at the end of your bayonet or swords. And the locals didn't ask for it, but the British were forcing themselves on locals and trying to, build an empire. That was the ultimate goal, and the British rulers knew what they were doing, knew and wanted to build an empire. And for a simple reason, it's the ruling class, the industrialists, the bankers know and like empires, because empires is more resources, access to more resources, access to more markets. That's what empire is, access to more resources and more markets. So the leaders of the societies, of many societies, wanted to have empires because it's more profitable to have more people and more land under your control. It's more money, more profits. And so the British industry, the British industrialists, and the British political leadership and the monarchy, they all wanted an empire. So what if many British commoners had to die to build an empire? They didn't care. It's the commoners, and the commoners were fed the same hogwash that yes, it's our British obligation to spread our way of life, because our way of life is the civil way of life, and the rest of them are savages. Even the French, but they wouldn't say that out loud. They would say it under their breath, because that's what empires are. People have to believe in that they are the best, and they have to go, train other people into following them. So that was the story behind the British Empire. Now the United States have come up, not the whole United States, well, the leadership, a segment of the leadership. Some call them neoconservative. Well, conservative used to be conserving status quo, what is. Conservative used to mean that we want what it is, how it is right now, we want to keep it this way. But many conservatives decided that we want to conserve what is in the United States as is, everything that we have here as is, but abroad, in dealing with other countries, we want to build an empire. So that's what neoconservatism is, and a lot of the liberals have fallen into that trap as well. So the liberals and the neoconservatives are of the same mindset, and the mindset is this. Well, the mindset is the same mindset that the British industrialists and bankers had during the empire years. That's the same mindset that the bankers in America and the industrialists in America and the arms manufacturers in America and the neoconservatives and the liberals have. The mindset is building an empire. More markets, more resources, more profit. But how to sell this to the public? How are we going to tell the public that we want to build an empire? How can we build an empire without telling the public that we are building an empire? Because building an empire is not an option. We want to do it because it's more profitable. Access to more resources, access to more markets. So these guys, they can't use we have to go, it's our obligation to go spread civility. These guys have come up with a different phrase. They have come up with a phrase that we are going to spread, we have the obligation to spread democracy and freedom. Now we are back at where we started, that we were talking about the reason for people immigrating, running away, seeking asylum, becoming refugees, is because they lost their security and stability. They can live without freedom and democracy, but they cannot live without security and stability. But these folks on this side of the Atlantic, the neoconservative and the liberals and the bankers and industrialists and all of these folks who want an empire because the empire is more profitable, are changing the British phrase from "we are obligated to spread civility." They're changing that phrase to "we are obligated to manifest destiny." They have this manifest destiny, as their headline a lot of the time. The Monroe Doctrine, the manifest destiny, all of this is basically, all of these ideas and doctrines are basically have one thing in common, which basically says we have the obligation to lead. But what they mean by lead is, in definition, they try to say that we have this God-given obligation to spread freedom and democracy. And they move forward with this, and they feed this to the public. Hey, you come on in, public, the common man, the peasants should come, help us go spread freedom and democracy. Even if the locals don't want it, don't understand it, don't need it, didn't ask for it, we have to go shove it up their ass if they don't take it. The same idea that the British, the same hogwash that the British were using, spreading civility, these guys are using similar hogwash, spreading freedom and democracy. Now, why civility? We all know why it was hogwash. Why is spreading freedom, liberty, and democracy, why this phrase is a hogwash? This might come as a surprise to many. Many of my English-speaking white Western friends. Here's the thing, folks. Freedom and democracy are not as important to people of the rest of the world as it is to maybe you, to people of Western democracies, and in specific United States. It's not important to them. Freedom and democracy is not as important to people of many parts of the world as it is important to Western democracies and specifically Americans or Canadians. Here is why. There is the scale that's on one side, if you can imagine, individualism. On the other side, if you can imagine, is collectivism. On the one side is 100% collectivism. On one side, it's 100% individualism. If you go through the scale of different nations, of different groups of people, of different populations of the world, you will see that they all don't think alike. In other words, it's not that there is this everybody in the world that is 100% for individuality and nobody in their right mind wants to be part of any collective. You see, this is the false narrative that the new colonial powers have promoted. New colonial power means United States, and this idea of spreading freedom and democracy. This is a false narrative that they have promoted, that everybody in the world wants to be free and democratic. Everybody. No, that's not the truth. In the scale of individuality on this side and collectivism on this side, all nations, all people, all ethnicities, all different groups, values are not the same. Some nations, some groups of people tend to be on this side of the scale, in which they value collectivism more than they value individuality. And some nations, like United States, value individuality more than they value collectivism. Why is that? Simple reason: history. History makes culture. History of a group of people, of a country, of a group of people, of a nation, of an ethnicity, their history is what makes their culture. And their culture is what makes their personal experiences. People who are born in a certain culture, because of that culture, they have a certain specific personal experiences. And that personal experiences dictates their likes and their dislikes. Many parts of this world, think China, Japan, Korea, South or North, doesn't matter, or Vietnam, or many parts of this world, they have this long history. We're talking about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 year old history, in which during this history, a long history, whenever they have been a collective or a group of people, they have survived. Those who have worked as a collective survived, and those who have worked as an individual perished. So through this history, collectivism has become more valuable than individualism, because collectivism meant survival, individualism meant death to them. Those who were collective stayed alive, and those who were individuals died. Through history, I mean, these areas of the world which there is so many back and forth of different ethnicities and nations, so many wars, so many massacres, so many this and so many that, so many famines, collectives usually were stronger and survived, and the individuals were weaker and perished. Simple. So in many of the cultures of the old world, if we consider the Americas the new world, and we consider Asia, Europe as a group as the old world, many of these countries through their history has become part of their, because of their history, it has become part of their culture. Being a collective has become part of their culture. Valuing collectivism over individualism because of their history has become part of their culture. And now it is because it is part of their culture, it forms their personal experiences after generation after generation after generation. It forms that culture, that collectivist culture, that culture that values collectivism, forms their individual experiences in life. And those individual experiences forms their value system. Forms their value system. So the result is many people in this world, remember, world has 80 billion people living on it, planet Earth, 8 billion and something. So in this 8 billion people, United States has got 300 million, Canada has got 30 million, Northern Europe altogether has got, let's say, 300 million. Europe in general has got 300 million. So the majority are not in United States, Northern Americas, or Europe. The majority are spread all over the rest of the places. And these rest of the places have got very long histories. Collectivist histories, which collectivism is part of it, is a strong part of it, as I said, because of, it benefited them, kept them alive, helped their survival, has become, so the collectivism has become part of the culture. So this culture has formed their personal experiences, and so individual value system has formed based on this idea of collectivism. So the result is this, folks. So the result is that these folks who have been formed in this culture, with this history, with these personal experiences, it's obvious that they value collectivism more than they value individualism. And what is collectivism? Here's the thing about the Chinese form of life, or the Korean form of life, or the Japanese form of life. These folks in that East Asia, they were communist long before communist was a word, was a common word in English language. These folks thought in a collective, their ideas was based on collectivism long before Marx or Engels or Stalin or Lenin or any of these European folks came with the idea of communism and socialism and this and that and the other. Before any of these Europeans come up with the words for it, or the articles for it, or the books for it, these folks were practicing it in East Asia, in the Middle East, in many parts of Africa. They were practicing collectivism. The whole idea of collectivism, collective, commune, it's all the same idea. It's valuing the collective, giving power to the collective instead of valuing the individual or giving power to the individual. So communism is not an idea or idea that it's not something that the Chinese have borrowed, or the Middle Easterns have borrowed from Marx or Engels and have read those books, and they are practicing those books. No. This is their idea. This is how their history has programmed them. They value collectivism. Their history has taught them to value collectivism. So it's not for example, Many people like to say, "Oh, North Korea, the dictatorship, this, and that," and if the people of North Korea want to be free, to be individuals, no, they don't. Look at South Korea. South Korea, if North Korea has Kim Jong Un, Sun, or whatever the fuck is this, the next guy is, South Korea has chibols. Chibols are basically corporations which are a country unto themselves. Samsung is considered one of their chibols. It's a corporation that has got tentacles in many things, that the people who work for this corporation literally worship the owners of these corporations. And usually these corporations are family run, family owned, family run corporations. They're called chibols. So you see that again in the north is national collectivism. In the south is corporate collectivism. It's collectivism nevertheless. In Japan, it's still people go into a corporation, they finish their education, go into a corporation, and they're there until they die. They pray to the corporation, they worship the owners of the business, the corporation, because you can call it capitalist collectivism. Whatever you want to call it, but the idea of collectivism, the idea of the collective is more important than the individual, it's there. It's in their blood, it's in their history, it's in their culture. So these folks, although you want to say democracies and Japan is a democracy and North Korea isn't, Japan's democracy is not a democracy either. They worship their king, and then they worship their leaders of their corporations, whoever owns you, and that's it. The people are trained so well into valuing their society so much that Japan is not a capitalist country. It's a really socialist country with the welfare that's provided from the state to the people. It's so good, so much, so well programmed that you don't see any homelessness in Japan, if any. We are talking about 0.0000001 if you see any. When you don't see homelessness in a country, when you don't see extreme poverty in a country, it's not that everybody in Japan can work, can make a good living, can this or that or the other. No. If you don't see any of this, and you know in your heart that many people are too old to work, too sick to work, too weak to work, too crazy to work, and you still don't see homelessness, that means it's got a very well thought after welfare program. And a very well thought after welfare program for the whole society is a socialist society. Socialist / communist, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But it's a society that is not capitalist, that is not very democratic, that is not every man for himself, that is values collective, commune, that it values the group more than it values the individual. And that is socialism, that is communism, that is valuing the collective more than you value the individual. So even many of these countries that on everyday conversation, many pundits and many people consider as, oh, these are democracies. Oh, no, they're not. They got a king, and then they got these chibols, and they worship people, they worship corporation, they worship their king, they worship their monarchy, and it's not. It's a very rigid collective society which values the collective, the commune, more than it values the individual. Why am I emphasizing individual? Here's the thing. Uh, what I'm trying to say is that when United States or NATO powers say we want to spread freedom and liberty and democracy all over the world, and I say that this is hogwash, and they know it. It's just the common man in Western democracies doesn't get it. Is this that the people of the rest of the world, they don't value what you're offering. The dictator that is there is offering them what they value: security and stability. What you're offering them, why you have to offer them with tanks and planes and bombs, is because the people, the locals, they don't want it, they don't value it, they don't care for it. Individualism is not important for them. Why I say individualism is because this: you have to value individual to then value individual likes and dislikes, and then value individual votes, and then have a democracy so the individual can express his opinion, his or her opinion. So the whole idea of democracy is based on individualism. Recognize the individual, recognize the different opinions of individuals, value that those opinions, give them the chance to vote, and at the end you have democracy, which is giving chance to vote of individuals. So in order for democracy to, be considered as a democracy, you have to value individuals. If you don't value individuals, the democracy is not a given. So in areas of the world that the individual does not matter, if you follow the line, if you don't value the individual, then you won't value the individual opinion, then you could care less if the individual exhibits his opinion by casting a vote. So at the end of the day, democracy is not important because you don't value the individual. And as I just explained, many cultures in the world, many places in the world, they don't value the individual. They value the collective. And this is not a constant. It's not. You can't. No one can say that in specifically that part of the world they value the collective more, and in this part of the world they value the individual more. No, it's not constant. For example, what I'm trying to say is this: in United States, you have, if we can put it on the scale, you can say that individualism is so important that 90% people think individualism is the most important thing, and 10% they think collective has a role. The collective society has a role in the well-running of the society. Collectivism has a role in the well-running of the society. You go for example, in Montana, the big sky country, you see it's like 98-2. That means, what I'm trying to say is 98 people think the most important thing in life, 98% think the most important thing in life is freedom and individuality and blah blah blah. And then 2% maybe they think maybe the collective has a role to play in the well-being of the society. You move to a city like New York, still in Americas. In a city like New York, you see, again, it has moved down from 98%. Now, in a city like New York, you have 90% of people think, or 85% of people think, individualism is very important, and 15% think that the collectives have a role to play in the well-being of society. You move across the Atlantic to the British Isles. Again, this value of individualism goes down. 70% think individualism is extremely important, and 30% think collectivism has a role to play in the well-functioning of the society. Thinking collectivism, thinking the collective, thinking the well-being of everybody is important in a well-running of the society. You step farther, you go Northern Europe to Scandinavia, you see 40% of the people think individualism is very important, and 60% think no, thinking in a collective way is better for the well-running of the society. You move farther across Europe, take a couple of steps farther in the Middle East or North Africa, or you go to China, you see we're talking about we're talking about 98% in Eastern Asia, Northern Asia, Middle East, Northern Africa. We reach to the point where 98% of people think that, I'm sorry, 2% of people think individualism is important, and 98% think collectivism is important in solving the society's problems, in well-running of well-functioning of the society. It just moves. In one side, you have 98% thinking collectivism is good and individualism is not that important, and you have on the other side, you have Montana, people living in Montana, for example, thinking that 98% thinking that individualism is the most important thing in life and collectivism doesn't even need to be there. So this, and I'm talking about individualism and collectivism, is because this is the basis of stating that why it's false to believe that or to say or to repeat that spreading freedom and democracy is important and everybody wants it, everybody should have it and everybody wants it. No, it's no such thing. People who believe in collectivism, who believe in their community, who think that the welfare of everybody is more important than the welfare of the individual, each individual, they don't know what to do with freedom. Freedom for what? When we say freedom means individual freedom, they don't have a grasp of why do you need individual freedom. This is how they're going to look at you. So why do you need individual freedom? The collective needs to survive. The collective needs to be looked after. The collective needs to be well fed, taken care of, well educated. Individual, no, we don't give a fuck about individual. If individual is too odd shaped, too difficult to work with, too whatever, the individual needs to be eliminated, or the individual needs to be changed, or the individual needs to be run out of the collective. This is how they think. This is their history, their culture. Nobody can say this is the wrong way to think. I am an example. I don't agree with anything of the society that I was born in. So I leave. I'm a Zoroastrian. I'm a religious minority in a society that I was born in. I was born in Iran. It's a Muslim country. I'm a Zoroastrian. I have nothing in common with them. I was born there, but I have nothing in common with them. And there I'm being discriminated against. I am being harassed. I am being not given job opportunities. I'm not being given the respect and that the society needs, I think, should provide to its citizens, all its citizens. But they don't think like me. That's the point. As I said in the beginning, 1 to 2% of the population of any country has to move out, will move out. And I am part of that 1 to 2%. These are the people who have been born in environments which values collectivism a lot more than they value individualism. So those individuals who don't look like the collective, who don't act like the collective, who are not exactly like the collective, they have to leave and migrate, immigrate, seek asylum somewhere else where they can live at peace. But that doesn't mean that we have to go over there and force the local population over there by bombing them. We have to force them to forget their history, change their culture, and start valuing individualism more than they value collectivism. That is the point I'm trying to make here. If they don't value individualism, it's because of their history, which resulted into their culture, which has formed their personal experiences. Killing 100,000 people, 200,000 people of that area, people living in that area of the world, just because you think by removing a dictator, you can change their perspective in life. And if you think by removing it, if they keep telling you that if we just remove that leader or that leadership, if we remove that leadership, we're going to set their people free and they're going to thank us, it's hogwash. You remove their leader, or you remove their top leadership, or remove whoever the fuck you want. You remove 100,000 people, kill 100,000 people. They're still gonna think collective. What collective means, why collective way of thinking ends into a dictatorship, it's simple. Dictatorship, what is dictatorship? It's a strong man ruling with an iron fist. Thinking in a collective manner will always end into that, because the collective says survival is the most important thing. The welfare of the collective is the most important thing. So what do we do to achieve the welfare of the collective? We have to have a strong leader, probably for life, to look after the people like a father. Like a father. You can't change your father whenever you don't like your father. Here's the difference between a democracy and a collective way of thinking, like China or North Korea or Iran, or in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Libya, in Iraq, in Iran, in China, in Korea, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. The reason they don't see democracy as the ideal thing is that they look at life in a collective mindset. They say the collective needs to be stable and secure, and to be stable and secure, we need a strong leader to eliminate all the threats to the collectives, to our collective. They don't believe that you can change your leader every other week, every other month, and then still be a strong collective. They don't believe in that. They don't believe it. That's why even in so-called democracies like India, you see that Leadership is keeps staying in the same families. You have the Gandhi family, and then you have the Nehru family, and then you have this family and that family, and these guys stay in politics for years, for decades, for generations. The Gandhi family has been there for 3, 4, 5 generations in Indian politics, because they think as a collective, because they don't feel they should change. The collective can change leaders like that. They think the collective will remain stronger if the leader stays the same, or if the leadership stays in the same family. They don't think individual, they think collective. Democracy doesn't match with collective mentality. Democracy matches with individualism. Value the individual, value the individual's opinion, value the individual's vote, and different individuals exhibit their opinion in a vote, and whoever is chosen becomes the leader for a short period of time, until the individuals decide they don't like that leader anymore. They think a new guy has a better idea of how to run things. This way of thinking is the Western, specifically American way of thinking. Is at one extreme of the scale. On the other extreme of the scale is that the collective mentality, which says the individual doesn't have a value, the individual's opinion doesn't matter. It's not that the leader says the individual's opinion doesn't matter. It's not that Kim Un-sun, whatever the fuck his name is, it's not that he is forcing people and telling people that your opinion, your personal opinion doesn't matter. It's the society that dictates to itself that individual's opinion doesn't matter. It's the society, it's the culture. Because of their history, it's the history which formed the culture, which forms the personal experiences, which tells each individual, the culture, the society, the history tells each individual, your personal opinion doesn't matter, you better match to the collective, become part of the collective, or get the fuck out, or die. This is their perspective in life. And they all think like that. It's not that you remove the leader, you remove the leader. Okay, North Korea supposedly, South Korea supposedly their politics is democratic. So what has happened? Again, you have a couple of families who have been in the top leadership of the country for the past 50 years. Couple of families, and then you have these chaebols, which are multi-tentacle corporations whose bosses, whose owners are usually just one family who owns the chaebol, and everybody works as a collective. It's like a capitalist entity. Supposedly it's democratic and capitalist, but it's neither. It's neither democratic nor capitalist. So in short, here's what's happening, folks. In short, they're telling you that we have the obligation to go spread democracy and liberty to those parts of the world. That's the phrase they use. But this is just so the common man would agree with them. The reality is their objective is to expand the empire, because the bigger the empire, the more profitable it is. Because the bigger the empire, the more access to resources and markets and people and consumer and customers you have. Doesn't matter what, from Coca-Cola to baby powder to arms sales, to warplanes, to tanks, to milk and McDonald's. Doesn't matter. The bigger the empire, the more access corporations and banks have to resources and customers. So that's the objective. But what they're selling you is that we have the obligation to go spread democracy and liberty to all. Just like when the British used to say we have to go spread civility to all the savages. These guys are saying we have to go spread democracy and liberty to all. That's the catchphrase. But in reality, most of these cultures don't care for democracy, don't understand democracy, don't value democracy, because they're actually collective societies. Their history, their culture, their individual people's experiences are based on the collective way of doing things. They don't understand democracy because for the simple reason that democracy is based on valuing individual. You're trying to sell people who don't value an individual a political system that is based on valuing the individual. They don't want it, even if you change the leadership. Why is it that in Libya, after they remove the leadership, Gaddafi and his sons and whoever the hell else was ruling there, why is it after they were removed, suddenly the country is in chaos? For a simple fact, the country is in chaos because it's the same process it went through before Gaddafi. Because the idea is the collective, and the collective only understands that collective is important. And to rule the collective, a top dog has to be recognized. There must be a top dog. There must be an absolute ruler to rule over the collective. This is what they want. This is what they understand. This is what is part of their culture, their history. Their history is dictating to them that the collective is more important than the individual. They're trying to tell you that people who don't understand democracy and don't value liberty and individual liberty and freedom, that they should be given, we should go over there and invade them and try to force them to democracy and freedom. Then they will know the value of democracy and freedom. No, they don't. Unless you eliminate all of them, you change their history, therefore changing their culture. Unless you eliminate all of them, they are still going to continue following their history, which follows their that means following their culture, which values collectivism more than individualism. You're still going to end up with a strong man. And that's the whole point. The Western Alliance is not, they understand this. They're much smarter than I or you. They understand this. It's just that they know these societies don't work based on democracies. They know that these societies all work based on a strong man. But the whole idea is they want a strong man they can do business with. They want a strong man over there who's willing to bend over and have these guys fuck him up the ass. Or fuck his people up the ass. Or whatever the fuck. Like the Saudis are doing. End of story. And here's the situation with immigration. When you go in, you topple a system, you're taking away the people's security and stability. Of course they're going to want to move out. They're going to move out. They're going to run away. They didn't want democracy or liberty. And you're removing their leadership by force. You're creating chaos, so they migrate in bulk. They migrate in bulk, and then your population feels they're overrun by these brown people. Leave the brown people alone. Leave them be. Let them have their collective government, their collective ideas, so everybody can live peacefully and stop expanding the empire. So you don't have to deal with all these brown people who are running away from the chaos.